Welcome, everyone, to week 2, episode 2 of my Theater Makers interviews. This week we have actor, director, and theater educator J.R. Rose. So we will start with the very beginning. J.R., what was your first theatrical experience?
When I was, I think, eight or nine, I was in a community production of Around the World in 80 Days. And I just loved it. And then my mother came and watched the show. Well, everyone came and watched the show, but then she came out and she goes, you do this really weird thing when you're not talking on stage and you stick your tongue in the side of your mouth. And so apparently, and I've seen the video of that, and every time I finished a line, I would go. So that was something obviously that was hilarious looking back upon, but I was 9. And so, yeah, that was my very first theatrical experience, and I really loved it. I was playing like 5 or 6 different parts, and I remember having to like change costumes and do all that kind of stuff, and it was just a really fun experience, but I didn't really get into it until high school.
Now, had you seen anything live on stage before that made you want to go do this show?
Not before that production when I was 8 or 9. I don't think. I mean, I do remember they took us to the Nutcracker when we were little, but that wasn't exactly inspiring to me or anything. But I think that in my like junior high years, I went to a really progressive, weird junior high that we had 10 periods a day, and each of the periods, and then it was on trimester. So we had 30 classes throughout the year in 7th and 8th grade. And only like 5 of those classes were your core, like social studies, math, English. And all of the rest were these ridiculous electives that like, you don't even see like some of these classes like in some colleges. Like I took oceanography in 7th grade.
Wow.
I took MIDI, like songwriting, like learning like to use MIDI software. I took a musical theater class. I took a class in crafts and printmaking. I took a class on mythology, like just really strange, like, and I think the whole point of it was to like just get us to spark our interests. I took a class called plastics that was just like learning how to use plastics and mold them, and we made clipboards. And I mean, we didn't have this stuff in my high school, but in junior high it was like really incredible. And so I remember in junior high I was in a musical theater specific class, like for one trimester, and we did like The Sound of Music, and played Captain Von Trapp for 2 scenes, and I played Max for 1 scene. It was really weird how they did that, but that was like another sort of, and I was in choir, and so I started like really getting into it in junior high. And then in high school, I saw a sign the first day of school saying auditions for the fall play, and I was like, all right, I'll do this, and I auditioned. It was The Mouse That Roared, and I was like student number 5 in like 2 scenes, but it was just like really amazing. And I remember when I was in junior high, they took us to go see the high school musical, and that year they were doing The Wiz, the all-white Park Ridge, Illinois version of The Wiz with an Asian scarecrow, and that was about as diverse as it got. And I remember being like just sort of blown away and like, oh my God, I really want to do this. And then when I went to that audition for The Mouse That Roared, so many of those kids that I saw in The Wiz were like at that audition, and I remember being like, oh my God, I'm like starstruck, like by, these kids thinking that they're like celebrities in some way.
Right.
But it was, that was sort of my beginning, and I did theater all through high school, and just became like a passion, you know.
I can hear whatever you're playing with.
Yes.
So is there a moment that made you kind of fall in love with theater specifically?
Um, I would say probably watching that production of The Wiz was um, like a pivotal moment for me that, you know, still sticks with me, because there was just something so magical about the whole production. And then on top of it, like knowing that like I was going to be going to this high school and I would be able to do that, it just like inspired something in me, and it just, yeah.
And what was your first directing job?
In college, I directed a one-act play. We had a program at Illinois State. I was a theater education and acting double major, so it took me 5.5 years with student teaching to get out of there. But we had a program called Free Stage, and in that program, you can apply. You have to submit a budget, and you submit, you know, where you want to do the show and the script, and then it was like a committee of students that reviewed the applications and then granted you permission and gave you the budget. I think the budget was like $200. And so I did this, it was a play called Ghost Stories. And Ghost Stories was like a three women only. And it was like these three women were best friends in high school, and it had been like maybe 10 or 15 years since they you know, got out of high school, and their lives had all totally changed. And it was set in like they were going on a camping trip, and it was just like an hour-long one act, and it was just a really wonderful. I had three really wonderful actresses, and so that was like my first like kind of taste. And then in my senior year of college, we had to direct a one-act play at one of the local high schools. And so I was assigned to Bloomington High School, and I did like a cut-down version of the effect of gamma rays on Man in the Moon Marigolds.
Okay.
And so those were my first two like real, I think, where I was at the helm. I had like assisted on some things, but pretty much throughout college I was still acting, and I was in a couple of shows a year. And you know, it was I started to get the bug for it then. But then right after I student taught, within a semester I had gotten my job at HF, and then was like asked to direct 2 or 3 shows a year. And that's kind of, I think, really where my big education in directing came, which was just from doing it, you know.
Right.
And I think I've now, in the past 20 years, I think I've directed about 65 or 70 productions between my high school and S.L.A.T.E and the drama group. And I had one stint downtown at the Royal George doing First Date professionally. And so, yeah, it's been a wild 20 years.
So with that first one act that you did, what was the thing that scared you the most going into it?
I didn't know what I was doing.
Okay.
Yeah, and they were the actresses were my friends, so that was always another thing. Like, you know, you don't want to, like, you know, make your friends upset. You know, that's always, you know. And I was, I think, 20 or 21 or something. You know, but I also learned that it's difficult doing. And I mean this with no disrespect, but it can be difficult doing an all-female show, and I just think I wasn't prepared for, you know, the camaraderie that those girls formed, you know. And ironically enough, my last production before COVID hit was an all-female production, and that was like sort of the first time I'd done an all-female show. since then, and it was really, really interesting to see how similar those experiences are and how interesting the rehearsals go.
Right.
Big men out of the mix.
Okay. What is the biggest lesson you took from either that first show that you directed or the first big show that you took on? What was the biggest lesson you took from that?
Well, my first musical that I ever directed was in my second year of teaching, and I did Ragtime. And
Start small.
yeah, everyone told me I was crazy. Like, how would you, like, why? And I said, well, I felt so passionately about the show and that it was the right show to be doing for our high school.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, when I came in to HF, our school was probably about 50-50 black and white back in 2002. And my first year of teaching, I want to say I did Medea and I did Scapine my first year. And I want to say I had 3 or 4 students of color audition for either of those shows.
Okay.
And I was sort of like, okay, something's wrong here. Our school is half black and there's
Right.
only 5 kids in the theater department. And so when I proposed to do Ragtime, I had administrators and people saying like, well, first of all, it's your first big show, and that's a really big show, and we don't have black people even auditioning in the theater department, and it could just be a disaster. And I was very nervous. I was very nervous about casting. I was nervous about some of the language in that show and some of the themes. And although I believe it's a beautiful show and has a message that everyone needs to hear, there could be people on either side of whatever there is to be sides about with equality.
Right.
Yeah. But, in the community that could voice their opinions one way or the other, and I didn't want to face that as a non-tenured teacher. And I just remember being very scared. And then we got to auditions, and I think I had 35 African Americans audition. It was great, and they were so talented, and the show was, just wonderful. But it was one of those shows where I was sitting with my choreographer on final dress rehearsal, like, well, we did the best we could, just like watching the show. And, it's like there were some good moments and it was fine. And then opening night happened, and it was like one of those magical moments. And
Right.
obviously, the opening of Ragtime is such a powerful 12 minutes of theater to begin with, but to like see what it was the day before which was kind of a hot mess, and then all of a sudden it just clicked for those kids. And it was, the audio, we had people standing on their feet after the opening.
Right.
It was just like, oh man, the theater magic worked again,
Yeah.
And we've all been there, we've all experienced that. And sometimes it is just having a live audience and the coming together that a cast does, in the face of things being shaky or whatever. But I just remember that being super powerful, and I was so proud to have taken that risk because I think it was so good for our high school and for the Homewood-Flossmoor community. And we have been a very integrated, very diverse theater department ever since,
So what was your big lesson from taking that? Was it just, take the risk, trust your gut sort of a thing?
It was take your risk, trust your gut. And one of the things that, I have learned over the years, but I certainly learned in that production was that, and I will say this about all actors, but especially with students, that they will always rise to the challenge. And that is something that I like every time I think of a show and I'm like, I don't know if they could handle it. that little voice comes in my head saying, of course they can handle it. You're the one that's scared, not them, and they have just surprised me over and over and over and over again. And same thing with when I'm working with adults,
Mm-hmm.
It's a very different kind of process and experience, but I truly believe that actors always kind of come through, and even when the material might be challenging or difficult or hard to process or hard to learn or characters are difficult, actors find a way to get there. And I think that was just a huge lesson for me, and that was the first time I thought, like, don't ever say that the kids can't do it, because they can.
So did you get any advice before you went in to direct your first show? I know that you were taking classes to teach theater, and I'm assuming you obviously took, directing classes, but was there any advice that didn't come from that class or a teacher that you got before you went in to really direct your first show, maybe outside of after you've graduated college?
I had a wonderful experience student teaching at Niles North High School, and the theater director there, his name is Tim Ortman, and he is just a dynamic, wonderful teacher and director, and I learned so much from him. I think I would say I learned just as much from him in that semester as I did in all of college, just because it's hands-on, and I was with an amazing person who had a wonderful program. They still do have a wonderful program, and not just about directing, although I assisted on a production while I was student teaching. That the semester I student taught was also my first week of student teaching was 9/11.
Wow.
So that was also kind of a huge in the world, and but he just taught me so many things, and about, like, laying out curriculum for courses and a program, and then in terms of directing, really how watching him talk to actors, right? And I had, man, I mean, how many before that point I probably had 10 or 15 different directors, but I don't think I was observing directors like the way I would now.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was just like a young, teenager or early 20s person that was like, I'm in a play, and like I wasn't like thinking about a director's style. There were directors that I loved and directors that drove me crazy, but like I wasn't thinking about their choices or how they directed, but watching him direct. And I don't do everything just like him. I mean, there are certain things like he's a big fan of like a ton of table work at the beginning of the process. And I've tried that with some productions, but I find it more useful to have conversations throughout the rehearsal process and just be like, okay, we're going to take a half an hour and talk about some character things or talk about what's going on. And he would do a lot of that up front, and that works for him, and I think that informs him in a way that it doesn't inform me. And but just the way he talked to actors and coached actors, and it's one of the things I pride myself on, is that I think that I'm a pretty good actor coach,
Mm-hmm.
and I can have those side conversations and just talk with actors about what's going on in the scene, and to try to help them understand and move them to another place or another growth point in their process with the show or with the character. But yeah.
So would you have any advice for someone who's got good ideas for directing but doesn't know how to work up to being a director?
Yeah, I would say put yourself on the other side of the table as much as you can. And by the table, I mean like the audition table or the director's table. I think there's this common misconception that if you act in enough plays, eventually you'll figure out how to direct. And I think for some people that may work, and I think that happens a lot in community theater. But I do think you do have to put yourself in those positions, see how casting works. And I don't know if there's questions about casting, but I mean, I could talk days about casting. But I think that, and I've had so many conversations with not only my students, but actually I've had more conversations with adult actors about casting than I have about with kids, because the kids are, I think, just, you know, I'm sure there's some disappointment if they don't get cast, they don't get the role they want, but they are just like, okay, you know, and they're moving on. The adult actors have a harder time reconciling with why I didn't get cast and all of the things that come into that. You know, what goes through a director's mind when they're trying to put a show together. And so I would just say to a younger person, like, assist, or even if you're just assisting on casting or just sitting in and watching that process, come into rehearsals, watch directors, read. I mean, I've read tons of books over my, 20 years of directing that have really inspired me, have given me ideas, have shown me how I don't want to do things, have, and I just think we are all lifelong learners, right? Hopefully.
Right.
And I think as a director, the minute you have told yourself, I have nothing else to learn,
Right.
it's like sort of the death of your career. And that goes for any field. If you're a doctor and you're like, I have nothing else to learn, like, you're done. There's nothing. And I think if we could try to change people's attitudes about that in whatever field they're in, we would live in a much more productive society. So.
Absolutely. This was a submitted question that I thought was very interesting. What is the hardest decision you have had to make as a director for the good of all involved in the production?
Ooh. The hardest decision. Well, I'll tell you one that comes to mind, and maybe something else will pop in my head. But a few years ago, I was directing a show, and we have a policy at my high school that the students have to be in school for a half a day in order to come to rehearsal. So we had a problem years back, where kids, especially during tech week, would just somehow convince their parents to let them stay home because they're tired and it's late nights or whatever. And so we were trying to crack down on all that, and it had been going, fairly well. And it was our final dress rehearsal for this play. And the play was called Bob, A Life in 5 Acts. And the actor playing Bob, who was in every scene of the show, didn't come to school. And he showed up to rehearsal, and I probably could have just pretended like I didn't know and had rehearsal because it was final dress. I said, it's not right, it's not fair. And I pulled them all together and I said, we need to cancel rehearsal. This actor wasn't at school today. And their faces lit up and they're like, but we open tomorrow. I said, I know we do. And hopefully it'll be great, but we can't be at rehearsal because we need to learn to follow the rules. And we have never had that problem since. And that was 6 years ago. In any production, they all come to school. And because it trickled, right? The younger kids teach the younger kids, Mr. Rose, right? And they know I'm serious. And also, I just think our attendance in general has gotten better.
Right.
I think that they know, and I've certainly had to do that a few times where I've had to ask an actor to leave for whatever the circumstances. And I think that those are hard decisions, but for the big picture of whether it's for the show or the program or your reputation you have to make those hard calls, yeah, I'm trying to think if there was anything else that was like some really, really tough decision, but no, I don't think so. I think that was.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
What do you look for when you're watching people audition?
Good question. I look for actors that stand out, that, if I'm seeing like 10 at a time, this person just stands out. And sometimes the standing out has nothing to do with their talent. For me, a lot it's an energy, it's excitement, it's I can't even like express like what that is, and directors know it when they see it. And so I look for someone that stands out. I look for someone that is prepared, right? Because I think preparation, I would take a prepared actor over a unprepared, more talented actor any day, just because they're so much easier to work with and you know what you're getting, right? I look for actors that can make choices. This is always a hard one for actors to understand, but I'm not looking for them to try in an audition to create the character as it exists in my mind, or to create the character as it exists in video or on Broadway or anywhere else. In fact, I am so much more drawn to actors that can go against that and make a choice that like totally surprises me and totally makes me think, oh my God, that's like, I've never seen that before. And even if it's not how the character ends up in the show or how I would direct it, or just somebody that has the creativity and the bravery and the fortitude to like come in and be like, I'm going to do this my way and kill it.
Right.
I think those are the people that I'm most attracted to putting in my shows. And then, and this is something that actors, I think, often forget, is that we have very, very long memories and as directors, and we are also really, really tied together as directors. And so I have many times, and this is going back to what your previous question, like making hard choices. I have probably 30 times in my career have had to, or have chosen to not cast someone who was incredibly talented because I just didn't want to deal with them.
Right.
And whether it was my own previous experiences with dealing with them, or somebody gave me a little call and said, hey, by the way, just so you know, this person. And I take those with a little bit of a different advisement than I do my own experiences, because someone who you work with and have a great time with might drive me nuts, or vice versa. Different
Absolutely.
people. But if it's like this person came to a quarter of the rehearsals, or this person was late every day, or this person got in arguments with people in the cast all the time, or this person made racist remarks, or those kinds of things, I don't tolerate. And I'm not, especially in high school and in community theater where everyone's volunteering their time and they just want to have a good time and have a really great experience. And the best casts are the ones where casts that get along and care for each other and support each other. And unfortunately, they're not always like that,
Right.
And usually it's one or two bad apples that spoils it, because once the one or two start, it filters into everybody else, right? And it just makes for an unpleasant experience. And so, I caution actors to be as professional and as kind and as hardworking as you possibly can be, because your goal when you get cast is to get cast again.
Right.
And to leave a mark. And I have had actors over the years that I would work with in a heartbeat, that I would like try to find shows that fit them because I just want to work with them again. Because
Right.
they inspire me and they teach me things about the craft that I didn't know. Everyone in the cast loves them and loves being around them, and they make less talented actors better on stage. Like, those are the people that you just gravitate towards, you know,
Right.
and want to use.
So this is I don't want to say a controversial question, but this is an interesting question. Do you have a preference over a good actor that is a good singer, or a great singer who's only okay at acting?
Good question. I try to take, so for musicals, I try to take a lot of things into consideration when I'm casting. And I definitely am someone, like most people, that does not enjoy going to a musical and hearing a leading or supporting role with someone that can't sing.
Right.
Because I think it interrupts the storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
That said, we sometimes have to make choices.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been a few instances in my career where the acting, either the combination of their acting or the relationship that comes about with in a callback situation with another actor, is so good and so strong that I will look to my music director and say, can this person's vocal be your pet projects? You
Right.
know,
Right.
because they are so good.
Mm-hmm.
And they will, and also we all know every role is different. There are some
Right.
roles that are a speak song or a quick little patter song that's done and over and you can get past it. And there are roles that have 47 minutes worth of solo singing, you know,
Right.
throughout the course of the show. And those are different kinds of things. If it's a character part and the person is a comic genius and has great connection with the other person that they play off of, and they're not the best singer, I may take a chance on that, right? Versus someone who's like watching wallpaper dry but has a beautiful voice,
Right.
right? Because you do need to sustain the character. So I guess that's not really like a good answer to your question. I just think it really depends on each situation and, you know, who else is in that callback and what role it is, you know.
Right. And I asked that because, in the years that I have been directing, it's been about almost 10 years now, that you often get people that think that the best singer should get the part no matter what. And over years, I've tried to explain that I would rather take a great actor or actress who's a good singer over a fantastic singer who couldn't act through, a bad commercial.
Right.
Or the thing.
And I think that that's the difference, is like a good singer versus a spectacular singer is one thing. A spectacular singer versus someone that has a hard time matching pitch
Right.
is a very different situation.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. That's why I guess in my mind, I don't think, a great actor who couldn't sing for their life.
Right.
You don't, unless you, like you're saying, if it's, a role that doesn't require a lot of substantial singing and it's, they can talk, if it's like a Rex Harrison playing Henry Higgins, where he didn't really have to sing all that well to play that part. That, I guess that was kind of the mindset. I'm always curious how other directors kind of.
I also think that if you have a good music director, and I've been fortunate to have so many incredible, phenomenal music directors over the years, if you've got a good music director, hopefully they can work with that person. And, sometimes what you're hearing in a callback is also nerves and, there's a lot of things, and perhaps the voice is better than you think. But I also think that depending again on the role and the situation, I once had a music director that told me, we can't cast her. She can't sing, she can't belt the high note. And I said, well, what note are you talking about? And it was like a note at the end of one song. And I said, okay, so she can mix it, or we could adjust it down or figure something out. But she is by far the best actress. And I'm not letting one note
Right.
not let her get this role. Right? You know what I mean? And that either she can work on it over the next 2 months and surprise us, or we can adjust it and take it down, or we just hear it mixed and it's 2 seconds out of a 2-hour musical. Right? And while yes, it'd be great if everybody, belted like Idina Menzel and Sutton Foster, that's not what we deal with in high school and community theater.
Right.
And,
absolutely.
You want to put on an entertaining show that tells a great story, and that's what your focus needs to be, not on does this person have the best 3-second at the end of the song.
Right. So is there a show that you've directed in the past that you would love to revisit again and maybe do over in a different way?
Yes, several. I've only directed a few things twice, and I kind of made a promise to myself that I wouldn't do them unless I really did something different.
Mm-hmm.
I directed Ragtime twice. I directed Into the Woods twice. And I directed a show called Circle Mirror Transformation twice. Circle Mirror Transformation is a show that I would literally do 100 times because there's so much in that. There's just so much in that show that is such a beautiful piece of work, and for theater people in general, that you can always explore new things. But I'm interested in, I would like to look at some of the shows I've done, and perhaps try to cast a predominantly Black cast with that show. I don't have like one that's like popping to mind is like, this is the one that I would want to do. But I am anxious to try to use my platform as a director to help people of color not just play Black roles, right? And I think that that's important. And I think that it's important to them as actors. It's important to the craft, that we understand. And it's not just like colorblind casting. That's a completely separate thing. But it's like, we're going to do this production, and I'm purposely making the choice. Like, we're going to do The Music Man, and everyone's going to be Black, or all the principals will be Black, right? And how does that change the dynamic of the storytelling? How does that and in some ways it may change, but I think the more important thing is that it probably won't.
Right.
And I think that that's the lesson learned there, is that we have a lot of great literature out there that somehow we feel, well, this is a white role because someone white played it before, and there's nothing that says that River City, Iowa wasn't filled with Black people. Right? And I just think it would be a really interesting and wonderful thing for theater artists to do, just to tell stories in a different way, and open the lens up a little bit more. And with colorblind casting, I mean, I do that every single day at HF because 90% of the roles written are for white characters, or were originally played by white characters. Right. And that's the demographic of my school. I'll never forget when we did Titanic, the musical. I had a group of Black girls came up to me at the audition, and they're like, "Mr. Hose, you know there wasn't very many Black people on the Titanic, right?" I said, "Yeah, I know, but that's okay. You know, like you're just playing a character, you know." And
Right.
but I think that there's a difference between just colorblind casting a show and making a conscious choice. And I also think that there's a difference between finding the balance and the importance of telling Black stories. You know, I'm slated to direct The Color Purple at the drama group next year, and I feel that the story of The Color Purple is a beautiful, amazing story and needs to be told. I've fallen in love with that show.
Mm-hmm.
But I also know that it's not a show that, like, you know, every African American performer wants to do over and over again, along with Hairspray, Time, and Once on This Island, and you know, Raisin in the Sun, and Fences, and you know, and I hope that we, as theater makers, can start exploring new voices of color from playwrights and composers, and start to see that there is more than just those few shows and Lorraine Hansberry and August Wilson, and, you know, which I like to, in some ways, and this is to no discredit of August Wilson, who's a brilliant playwright, but in some ways, like, those kinds of shows, I feel like are safe for white eyes. And it's like, this shows the African American experience in a very safe way for us as white audience members to appreciate. And I just think that there's something that we can do better than that, and that we can watch Black performers and people of color in a myriad of roles, and it will bring so much more to any show that we do, you know? So.
Do you think that those are still shows to get them interested in that field or in that theater, that sort of thing, when, you know, I don't think it's every young Black male or young Black females, you know, I don't think they grow up thinking, yes, you know, hello, Dolly. You know, but when they see things like Color Purple, but when they go to a place and they go, oh, this theater does shows that are our stories, and then there's that chance that they go, you know what, they're doing this, I'm going to try out for it anyway, and then they walk away with, you know, they could walk away with playing Marion, or they could walk away with playing Millie, or any of those parts. So I mean, I can say I understand what you mean with those titles, and I think, you know, as well as anybody else, that for a lot of theaters, unfortunately, it's no longer just about the art of a show. It's got to be business as well. So I agree. Those are ones that are safe, but I always like to think of them as, you know, almost like a gateway in. It is their story. It's a good way. So then when this show comes along that isn't traditionally, you know, any races.
And I think the conversation's shifting, right? And I think that is what has to happen. And we need to, in our organizations, we need to say, how are we telling Black stories?
Mm-hmm.
How are we using and utilizing Black talent? And are we listening to people of color and to the kinds of things that they're interested in?
Right.
And making our theater as inclusive and equitable and diverse as possible. And it's all of those things. It is doing The Color Purple. It is doing an all Black Music Man. It is doing, you know, The Rainmaker, and just colorblind casting it, right? And having a diverse group of, you know, people in that show versus it used to be an all-white show. It's all three of those things, and they all have to happen. You
Right.
know, it can't just be the one black play in February by
Right.
that we're, you know, celebrating Black History Month. And I say that as someone who totally acknowledges my white privilege, totally acknowledges my white privilege as a theater director, but also as someone that teaches young black artists every single day of my career, and someone that has a black son, and we need to do better.
Right. So it's like completely change gear. What are some of your biggest pet peeves when it comes to actors and actresses?
I have a very big pet peeve with self-deprecation and actors that kind of crap all over themselves and make it like, you know, a public display, you know, for the cast or for me or whatever. When they say, I'm not good enough, oh, I'm horrible, that was horrible, oh, I sucked, oh my God, what am I, like, it drives me insane, because 99% of the time they don't suck, they're fine, they're forgetting it's a process, they had a shitty moment, or which is all part of the process, you know.
Right.
And I just think that is, it's just hard, and it happens in high school, it happens in community theater, it happens in professional theater. It's just, and I think by their nature, actors are, you know, constantly dealing with self-esteem and their worthiness, because their whole life is trying to prove that they're worthy. So I understand that piece of it, but I try as hard as I can to help talk an actor off the ledge and be like, enough. And if it continues, I'm just like, stop. No, we're not going there. Thank you. You know, and that might be annoying for them, but I think in the long run, it's letting them know that I believe in them, that I support them, and that nobody else in this room needs to hear you complaining about yourself, because it's not doing anything to help the work.
How do you handle conflict between actors?
That's a good question. I think, you know, everything is situational, you know, and it depends on the personalities involved, the situation involved, how much I know of it, how much is hearsay. Also, I handle things a little differently with adults than I would with students. But I do think that communication and just talking through whatever the situation might be is always the best thing you can do. And, you know, even if it means it gets ugly for a little bit, and let people say what they need to say. I just think it's important, but holding, you know, animosity in, especially in a cast situation where, you know, you've got people that need to be in relationships with each other and supporting each other and acting like they're in love or acting like they're best friends or that they're mother and daughter, and they can't stand each other and there's something brewing, you know, it shines through. It does. And so you got to nip it as early as you can and try to mediate, you know.
This was a good submitted question, and I wanted to ask it because I've been involved in a handful of your productions, and I know people that have been involved in a lot of your productions. How do you maintain being sober-minded in a field full of differing opinions and perspectives?
That's a great question. Listen, I think that everyone that is involved in a theater production has obviously their opinions about everything, from things about the show to things about politics to things about personalities. And it is sometimes daunting to navigate through all of that.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to the show, as a director, it's your job to, be that voice of reason. I take great pride in listening to my actors. I tell them very early that I do not have all the answers. I don't pretend to have all the answers. You will ask me questions that I will say I don't know to, and that's all right. And I will ask questions of you that you will say I don't know, and that's okay, and we'll discover it together. I think the roughest situations come when somebody decides that they know best,
Mm-hmm.
and make it their job to let everyone else know that they know best, and that perhaps the director or the music director or the choreographer or the one of the designers, costume designer, that they somehow don't know what they're doing, or and theater people are opinionated, myself included,
Mm-hmm.
yourself included. You didn't even laugh at that, Tyler.
No, I'm not gonna lie. Yes, but like you're saying, I'm also the type that even when you're the director, what you think is best is not always best. This person might not be able to do that, and
Right.
I enjoy. This is what I have in mind, and then this actor does something totally different that I go, oh, I love that even more.
Right.
Or what I wanted doesn't work. What they want doesn't work. So now we have to find a third avenue.
Right. Or
that's
a fifth or a sixth way, right?
Right. And that's the thing that I love about being on both sides as both an actor and a director, especially when you work with a director that's not, it's my way or the highway. That's one of the things I love. And I've done that, not to call you out, but in the shows that I've done for you, you don't give me a lot of direction. You let me play, you let me figure things out, and then it's always little things. It's the little things, and I've said that to people, for example, when we did Assassins, and I had two 2-page monologues by, I was about to say monologues by myself, a little redundant, but you never really, other than like a couple of physical things to do, you gave me one single bit of direction, and it was, I want people to think that by the end of the first monologue, he's bipolar. And by the end of the second monologue, I want him to really think he has just been emotionally abused over the years and constantly, put upon. And it was that sort of thing. I'm like, okay, that's what I had to keep in mind. It was that tiny little thing. But I've watched you as a director directing other people and never telling them, well, this is how it should be. It's always, well, this is what I'm thinking. What are you thinking? Let's, whether we marry the two or whether one's better, this sort of thing. That sort of thing. And that's, like you said, you pick up things from directors. That's one thing I think I've picked up from you and others is, if what you think as a director is everything that you want is the best thing, then you just go do it.
And
that sort of thing.
And to your point, Tyler, and I think every director knows this, that in some ways your directing style really shifts from show to show, but also from actor to actor.
Mm-hmm.
And with someone like you in that role, like specifically as Sam Bick, like I didn't need to like break that down paragraph by paragraph with you and say, mm-hmm. What's he doing here? Let's do this, because you had already done that work. And it was evident in your audition that you had done that work. So then I took that as like, okay, this is where he is. He's already at like an 8 out of 10 with this character. And it's my job to to bring you like from an 8 to a 10,
Yeah.
right? That is the details, and that is, I'm sorry, my little like extra light turned on. It's my job to like get you to an even greater place with much more specificity, right?
Right.
That's the name of the game, is like, how specific can we get with this? And there were other people in Assassins that those characters are tough and they're really hard to understand. And from an acting standpoint, like putting yourself in the place of somebody who tried to kill a president or did kill a president, that's very difficult, and it took a lot more finessing. And there were some younger people and less experienced people in that cast that I really had to talk through a lot of things.
Right.
And so you just have to think about, well, who am I working with? Where are they already? How can we, and I think that is truly the greatest gift of directing, is if you can find a way to be fluid enough in your style, right? To say, I'm going to work with you like this and with you like this, but at the same time, I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to ask for your opinions. I'm going to let you play, because it's a play, and then help guide you to what I think will help my vision come across.
And that's one thing that I have said, and not to necessarily stroke your ego, however you want to say it, is that I said when it comes to you and seeing the shows that you've done a mix of comedies, you've done a mix of dramas, both musical and not musical, and that while I have seen the dramatic things you do, and I think that that's your strong suit, your dramatic plays and your dramatic musicals that you've done, not that the comedy stuff you haven't done is great, I said, to me, your biggest, I guess, strength as a director is you know how to pick a cast. And in doing things like, playing Burger and Hair for You, or playing Barfy, or, well, I won't say Forbidden Broadway, we just went out there and made fools of ourselves, but in those two things, it was never, I was never told, do this to make it funny. I've always maintained that you are smart enough to know these people know how to be funny, and they know how to be funnier than I can tell them how to be funny.
Exactly. And I was just
let them do their thing. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Yeah. And I was just about to say, like, someone like you, or just some other, like somebody like Dana, who was in Spelling Bee, come to mind. Like, I don't have to direct you on comic timing. Like, you guys just have that as one of your skills that are built in. And especially having worked with you, I know that for sure, because I've worked with you several times. So I know, okay, I can remove that from my directing process with Tyler. He will nail the timing every single time, because it's one of his gifts. Other actors, comic timing doesn't come quite so naturally.
Right.
And you have to shape those moments and rehearse those moments in a way so that it feels like it's natural. And, but that said, I agree with you that comedy is 10,000 times harder than drama.
I've always tell people that I think comedy's harder.
God. And as a director, I think comedies are 10,000 times harder to direct than a drama.
Right.
And it just takes so much to really get people in the same room to laugh, and it sometimes has nothing to do with the writing. Sometimes the writing is, I say this all the time, I'm like, not to bring out my gay here, but I think that, like, The Golden Girls is one of, like, the most brilliantly written shows, like, ever. Like, the writing itself is so funny.
Right.
I just don't think it would have worked without those 4 women, because they just had such impeccable timing and such impeccable like interconnectivity between them, that which then that fed the writers.
Right.
So it's not just like, oh my God, the script is hilarious. You can get a really hilarious script and a really bad cast, and it's right. You know, and I appreciate the compliment on casting, because I do think that is one of my strongest suits, because and I wish that every director who ever lives will be able to get, you know, the strongest cast they can, because it makes everything so much easier.
Right.
And you know, when you get a solid cast, it really is just such a great time. You enjoy going to rehearsals. You never know what's going to happen, because the people are so wonderful, and you're watching them breathe life into this production. And when you have a cast with a few miscast people, or things that, you know, where your hand is forced because of this thing or another, and, you know, or you didn't have the right people audition, it can be very hard, you know. And I feel very fortunate to have worked with all of the actors I worked with over the years, and I agree. I think that that's one of my, and sometimes people I know, you know, because in community theater, you work a lot as a director with your friends, and I know over the years, and I've heard the stories, that sometimes I would put out a cast list and people would be like, what? Right? Like, at first. And then by the time the show comes around, people are like...
You had that, not to toot my own horn, but you had that with casting me as Tata in Ragtime. A lot of people...
Because everyone just thought you were a comic.
Right. Everybody saw me as funny, you know, as the comedic part. And I mean, and knowing the show as well as you do, that's a somewhat funny part. Tata is I mean, he's certainly funnier than the other, you know, some of the other characters. But that was sort of the thing, and that was one of the, not that you gave that challenge, indirectly you gave the challenge of, well, now I've got to prove those people wrong who just went, really? And, you know, and some of them I know I did, because they told me. And some, you know, I'll never know if they were impressed by it, but that's happened a lot. And I've had to deal with that too, when you go, you know, the cast has come out, and sometimes you don't hear it till much later.
Right. Or in that,
like, oh, I thought that was an odd choice, and then I saw it, and I was like, oh wow, that was perfect.
Yeah, or in that same production, I was fortunate, and I know, you know, I count my blessings, but I think we had, correct me if I'm wrong, but like 8 or 9 people called back for Sarah.
Oh, you had many choices for everything. Even some of the smaller principal parts, you had at least 2 or 3 choices.
Choices for Harry Houdini, and like, you know, that kind of, and I was so fortunate in that production. But I remember with the Sarahs, I'm like, how lucky am I that I have like 8 or 9 and there was not one bad voice in the bar. No. Like, literally. And it was like, how are we going to do this? And because they were all so good. And then it really came down, and I think we only had a couple of choices for Cole House. So once we kind of figured out the Cole House, then it was like looking at relationship and those kinds of things. And then we had them sing Daddy's Son. And I just remember that, you know, the actress we cast, Kelly, she just shattered me. And that song I've heard, a zillion times. I've already directed it. And she, in that callback, she shattered me. And Kelly had, I don't think, ever really been on stage before. And because I remember like kind of helping her, like she was not cheating out.
Right.
And I remember, and also her physical type was not typically.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, she was like super tall. Like she was like, what,
Very.
Or something.
I'm pretty sure she was taller than Randall.
Yeah, I mean, like she
not
was
by much, but enough.
Right, but it was just like in that moment, it was like there is no one else. There is absolutely no one else that shattered a whole table of casting people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember like pushing myself back in my chair, like, what was that? I mean, it was just so, she was so connected. And part of it was probably because she didn't have a lot of experience and didn't have a lot of training. And she was just able to quickly get to the emotional center of
Mm-hmm.
that song. And, you know, and I pride myself in that. But I know when I first, that list came out, people, because there were more seasoned people, older people, people with vocal degrees that were among the callback list. And we're like, who is this person, right?
Right.
Like,
Oh, yeah.
and but then they saw the show,
Mm-hmm.
and you got it right. You
Yeah.
it was like, she's brilliant, you know.
So, have there been any really big onstage flubs over the years that kind of bring a smile to your face that you think back and it just happened to come? I said that and instantly thought of one myself from one of your shows. But has there been one that you're just like, you think maybe at the time you didn't, or maybe you did, but now you look back on it and you can kind of think of that story and it makes you laugh?
um as an actor or a director?
Either.
When I was in college, I was in a production of Assassins with Megan Hoyt, and we were in the ensemble. And it was in a studio theater that had 4 entrances, and you literally had to like go through somebody's office to get to one of the entrances. And as you know, in that show, if you're in the ensemble, you have a bajillion costume changes because it's, you know, different periods of time between each of those songs. So I had all these crazy costume changes, and then the director had asked if I could only wear my glasses for, you know, this scene and that scene, and then, you know, and not wear them for the other scenes. And I was like, yeah, I guess. I mean, I'm not like crazy blind, but I don't like being on stage and everything being blurry, especially like when it's in a small space, you know.
Right.
And so I decided that I probably had enough time to take my contacts in and out.
Okay.
That did not work out so well. And because of course he told me this like on like final dress rehearsal. So my first time trying this new transition was like opening night. And so I was rushing around, whatever, and I was trying to like get my contacts in and ended up like totally missing a scene.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah. And I thought about like coming on late because it was like 20 seconds into it. And I'm like, I could probably just go out, but it was such a small space. I think that it sat like 100 people. But I remember feeling like I've never felt so mortified, like how horrible,
I
you
don't
know.
know how you think you would sneak in.
I know, and especially in a studio space, right? Yeah, like
Right, right.
yeah,
That would, yeah,
my self just blending in quickly to
yeah,
the ensemble of 5.
yeah, yeah.
So,
Uh,
and then like as a director, my scariest experience, which I still haunts me, I was doing a production of Black Comedy at HF.
okay.
Which, do you know that show?
I think I've heard that title.
So it's by Peter Schaefer,
Yeah.
and the premise is brilliant. It's actually it's a farce,
Mhm.
and the premise is that at the very beginning of the show, it's pitch black, right? And the show starts, and you are hearing the 2 main characters having a conversation. It takes place in 60s London. And
Mhm.
they're having this whole conversation about how her parents are coming over for dinner, and he's all nervous to meet them, and yada, yada, yada. And they're just, but for like 5 minutes with no lights, right? And you think that there's a mistake, right? Like as the audience, you're sitting there and you're like, what is going on? Why are there no lights? And they're walking around doing the whole show in complete blackness. And then all of a sudden you hear this gigantic power surge. and the record player that was on like slows down, and as soon as the power surge happens, the lights go on, but the actors are now in the dark. So it's
Right.
like reverse. So now we can see them, but they're like fumbling around, and so the whole show takes place for the actors in pitch black. So they're falling all over each other, and you're getting to watch all that.
Right.
So during the one performance, the actress that was playing the lead girl, she, and the whole show is them like, fumbling around this apartment. And she's doing that, and she goes over and she bumps, and she was a great comic actress, but she bumped into a table and a glass broke on the ground. And she was like, oh shoot, and like, I'm gonna get this. And there was a broom like right there. So she kneels down and starts to like dust the broken glass like into a tray or something. And she knelt into the broken glass. And then she was wearing like a short mini skirt and these white, like leather knee-high boots. And the entire rest of the act, she was just bleeding profusely. And half of the audience thought it was like just what was supposed to happen. Like she jumped in and broke the glass and cut her leg and, thought it was a fake thing. And I ran back there and I was like ready to stop the play. And she's like, if you stop the play, Mr. Rose, I swear to God, I'm fine. I'm like, you are bleeding. And she's like, it's fine. And so she did the whole rest of the act and ended up having needed stitches. Like it was like really, really bad. So we learned our lesson about never having glass on stage.
Yeah.
And also when it does, if there is glass on the floor, we don't kneel down in it. And, but yeah, I mean, that's part of the fun of theater is all the weird, crazy things that happen that you're never expecting. And hopefully people don't get hurt, but it does happen sometimes. And,
Yeah, I was thinking of when Aaron fell off the set.
That was another scary one.
So, are there any, what do you think are some of the most important lessons that theater has taught you or teaches people in general?
Oh my God. I think theater, how do you start with this question? I think theater teaches us how to be human. I think it allows us to share our stories, share our happiness, share our sorrow, our moments of levity, our moments of despair, and allows us a mirror into what it is to be a human. And I think, all of the arts do that.
Mm-hmm.
Music does that, visual arts does that, dance does that, film does that. But there's just something about theater that really taps into that human connection because it's story based. Mm-hmm. Right? We can look at a piece of art and you could love it and I can hate it. And we have our own opinions about it and we're interpreting it and trying to figure out the artist's reasoning, or we can listen to a piece of music or watch a film that we're distanced from in some way. Yeah. But there's something about being in the same space, breathing the same air, living in the same moment with actors and an audience that says, you are human, I am human, please listen to this story, and hopefully it affects you in some way.
Right.
And it's this shared communal thing that, I just don't think exists in much of anything else. And then for those of us that work in the theater, I mean, oh my gosh, theater teaches us collaboration and time management and empathy and, working together and deadlines and conflict resolution and, ensemble building. And I mean, the list goes on and on. I mean, there's just, we have a poster that we use at school that we for back to school night where the kids come in and it just says like theater is English, theater is science, theater is math, theater is music, theater because it is, and our field encompasses all of those things in various degrees, and depending on what play you're doing on top of that, you've got the themes, the messages, the world that the play is set in, and which encompass so many wide variety of topics, and so I just think we learned so much from working on productions.
Yeah, I don't remember who, but I remember someone once saying that, not necessarily specifically theater, but because it was a theater thing, that theater is one of the few, if not maybe the only field that encompasses all other fields. Because you need all other fields at some point, whether it's the manufacturing or whether it's medical or law enforcement, they will encompass all other fields at some point. You don't really find that with a lot of other ones. So is there anything within the theater world that you wish you were better at?
I think my biggest, and I think I've gotten better over the years, but it's still something I'm working on, which is being able to let go of certain things. I think when I was a younger director, I would have very specific, like, it has to be this way, and I would freak out if like a designer did something that wasn't exactly the way it was in my head or whatever. And I just realized like I wasn't being a good collaborator, and I wasn't trusting my my designers or my actors in the best, most supportive way if I couldn't let go and say it'll be okay. And I think part of that comes with age, and part of that comes with experience, and also as you get older, your priorities shift a little bit. I know mine have since I've become a husband and a father, and you realize that your little skit isn't as important as you think. I mean, it doesn't mean it's not important, but you don't need to stress and stay up late at night worrying about, and I think as directors, that never really goes away. We will always worry, and but I do think that I have tried and will continue to try to just let things go, and trust the process, and trust that it'll probably be just fine.
Same question. Are there any aspects of theater, whether it be a design thing or this, that you wish you were, you wish you could learn more about, or that you could take time and go, I really wish I knew more about this subject of theater?
Yeah, I mean, most tech things, I feel like that was a deficiency in my training in college. We took like a couple of courses. I took a costume course and a makeup course, and I think I took like a combined scenic lighting and sound course in one semester, and we worked on a few crews here and there. But I do wish I was more knowledgeable. I've taught myself, I've been better at sound. I understand lighting much more as a director, and can communicate with designers in a much better way than I first was able to. But I think just all the technical sides of things I wish I was better with. And part of it is that I am just not a hands-on kind of person. Like I'm one of those people that gets something out of a box, and even if there's a video or a direction or whatever it is, I literally am like, whereas somebody else could just pick it up and be like,
right.
I just don't have those skills. And I know that other people look at what I do and say, how can you read this piece of text and envision all of this stuff happening and then make it happen? And I'm like, I don't know, that's just what I do. Like, I don't know, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal to me. But you know, like I had to have my brother-in-law and my dad come over to help us install a fence because there's no way in hell that I would be. I mean, there's just it would not have. It would have been a disaster and a waste of money. But they like pulled the crap out. Boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
And 2 hours later, we had a fence, and I'm like, oh my god! And like to me, that's like genius level. Like that they could do that.
Right.
I literally would have no clue. You know.
Yeah, but they wouldn't know what, go downstage means.
That's true.
So one more question before we get to two very deep questions.
Okay.
Has there been a time where an actor or an actress in a show you were directing has made a choice that wasn't a way that you sort of, or you didn't give them direction, but they made a choice that you were just completely kind of taken aback? Like, I wasn't expecting that just happened, and you just went, oh my God. Like, I wasn't expecting that, and it just, like, I don't want to say moved you, but, like, you weren't upset by it, but you were just, like, totally taken aback by the choice that they just made.
Oh, I think that happens in almost every production. I am in awe of actors, and I live for those moments when they surprise you.
Mm-hmm.
I love when those things happen in auditions, especially. That's why I mean, I love auditions. I could sit in auditions. I would love to be a casting director when I retire. But I think that happens like at least a couple times in every show. I remember recently that happened a lot in my production of Caroline or Change. I just had some really incredible performers in that show that unlocked the material for me through their choices in ways that I was not able to understand.
Mm-hmm.
The actress playing Caroline was brilliant. The young boy that played Noah, who's like 10 years old, like would make choices sometimes, and I'm like, oh my God, like that was brilliant. And like with no direction, and that's like the lead role,
Mm-hmm.
That just like really shocked me. My husband in that show made some choice. That was a tough role. He played,
Mm-hmm.
and Stewart is on stage quite a bit, but barely sings and just doesn't have a whole lot to say because he's kind of closed off to his life and his world. And Brandon, who's usually very gregarious and is outspoken, and he would come in and do these scenes where like he wouldn't even look at Noah,
Mm-hmm.
Derek, and that's so foreign to me to say, hey, don't look at him, but just ignore that he's like even in the room. And Brandon just sort of like came up with those moments, and
Right.
we're so subtle, and so like that was a show that I recently that I was like so struck by several performers like really making those choices that weren't apparently clear to me, but were just so brilliant.
I maintain my favorite acting moment when seeing that, and I'm being dead serious, was Regina miming eating those latkes. I don't know why. I just went, honest to God, it looks like she's really legitimately eating something, and there's nothing in her hand.
Yeah, and she's
something so small and simple. I was just like, most people like fake it, and you go, oh, it doesn't look realistic at all. And I'm like,
but Reggie is one of those actors that like she puts herself in a bubble of the play,
mm-hmm.
and she doesn't come out, and it's just like, I mean, I've been in scenes with her as an actor, and I've also directed her several times, and it's just brilliant to watch someone be so, and I don't think I ever said, hey, pantomime eating.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But it was just like, and it wasn't just pantomime, like you believed her.
Oh, absolutely. I would have just thought she had like invisible latkes. And I actually remember seeing it and going, and having to double check that there weren't actually anything. The plate was empty because that's how much I believed it was. So here's a couple of more heavy questions. These were both submitted. I don't know if they mean within theater or not, but the first question was, what makes your heart cry?
Hmm. Well, I'll be vulnerable. Um, I've been, you know, obviously the last few weeks have been tough for a lot of people, but um, I am, I'm scared for my son to grow up in this country,
Mm-hmm.
and that makes me heart cry
Yeah,
because I look at his sweet little face, and all you want to do as a parent is protect your kids, and we're living in a society where it's just hard to protect them.
absolutely.
And I read something about from a friend of a friend that just said that, like, over the summer, last summer, her son, who was 12, like, went from, he went up like 4 shoe sizes in a summer, and like was just, he became, had a man body and was no longer a boy.
Mm-hmm.
And she said all she could think about is that her black son was no longer a cute little boy in the street, but was a threat.
Right.
And it was just so harrowing to read that and to think that that will happen to my son someday. And I'm just trying to do everything in my power to change, you know, perceptions and get people to understand that it's okay if you felt a certain way before, but if you recognize that that's not okay and you vow to make a change, then it's okay. Like, we all change our thoughts and opinions on things. And, no one's saying you're a horrible person. You're only a horrible person if you make a conscious choice about it and continue,
Right.
So anyway, that makes my heart cry.
Um, do you desire to be known for what you do or who you are and why?
Oh, who I am, for sure. I think that if anybody goes into any profession answering the other way, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. And it's, I want people to say, JR is a really great guy, not JR
Right.
is a great director. I mean, that's nice if people think I'm a great director, but if I'm a jerk and no one wants to work with me and I can't get people to audition for my shows, then then it's sort of.
Now I interpret that question maybe slightly different than you are. I would interpret it more as, would you rather have, for example, your students in 20 years remember the shows that they worked on that you did and maybe how those shows helped change them, or you and how you might have changed them? And I know they kind of could go hand in hand,
Yeah.
but
And I think my answer is still the same, but I do think for students, and I know this thinking back to the teachers I've had in my life, um, it's a blurry line, right? I have, like, for instance, my high school choir director. Um, I remember him fondly because he sat in his office and would just talk to me and let me and like hear me out. But I also absolutely loved being in choir, and I felt safe there, and I felt like I had a voice there. And same thing with my high school theater teacher. He wasn't quite as, like, get to know you as like our choir teacher was, and he was a little bit more reserved, but he was still like always in our corner, and I felt safe in his class, and I felt safe in his shows, and I think he was a wonderful man, and just a, you know, a person that inspired me. I mean, obviously I became a theater teacher, you know, and he had a huge impact on my life, but it is hard to like separate those things, you
Yeah.
know, especially like someone like you know me as a person, but you also know me as a director.
Mhm.
So when you think of me, both of those things form your opinion of me. Does that make sense?
Oh,
But
absolutely.
whereas someone who doesn't do theater and they only know me as a person, you know, or someone who I'm not close to at all and only knows me as a director from that one show they did, right? You're going to have a
Right.
skewed perspective, you know. But yeah, I definitely, you know, my work is important, but it's not as important as who I am to other people, you know.
Okay. So we're going to end this interview with a modified version of the questions from inside the actor's studio, which these questions were created by Bernard Pivot. What is your favorite musical?
Mm. That is so hard. My husband just said Caroline or Change. He said it is. It's your favorite. It probably is.
Okay.
Yeah, Caroline or Change.
What's your least favorite musical?
Oof. Phantom of the Opera.
Thank you. Thank you for that. What is your favorite play?
Oh. Um, I think my favorite play, and it's hard because I've directed it, but it had such a profound impact on me. Um, is a play called The Last Days of Judas Iscariot.
Okay.
And I just think it's a beautiful, beautiful show that people need to see because it's about forgiveness, you know. And I just think that that's such an important, but
Mhm.
it's also hilarious and, you know, magical and all kinds of, yeah. Look it up, read it.
What's your least favorite play?
Mm, I don't know, probably something by Neil Simon. Like, or as I like to say, all of my technical directors over the years have, or scenic designers have laughed at me because um, I want to say of all of those productions that I've directed, maybe 2 or 3 have been like unit interior sets. So like any play that just takes place like inside 4 walls, I find limiting for some reason. It's just not my aesthetic. Like I don't want to be confined and I want to be able to create a world. And if it's like we're in this apartment, it's,
Right.
you know, so yeah, like anything that's just sort of like your standard typical like play that is inside, you know, that's not my jam.
What's your favorite word?
Hullabaloo.
Hullabaloo. What's your least favorite word?
Mm, I don't mind moist. My husband said moist. That's that's horrible.
Well, Brandon can get his interview later.
My least favorite word. Probably no.
Okay. What sound or noise do you love?
Babies laughing, giggling.
What sound or noise do you hate?
I don't like alarms, like smoke alarms, fire alarms, like really, really loud, piercing sounds. Yeah.
Other than your profession as a teacher and outside of theater, what other profession would you like to attempt?
Graphic designer.
What profession would you not like to attempt?
Anything where I get dirty.
Okay. All right. And if heaven or an afterlife exists, what would you like to hear when you arrive to that place?
Good show.
All right. Well, that ends our interview. So I thank you, and I misintroduced you earlier. I just said J.R. Rose. You are J.R. Willard-Rose now, or as we like to say in our apartment, J.R. Woes. Well, Willard is not as funny as J.R. Woes. I thank you for being my guest for this second episode. I think you covered quite a bit.
Good.
So I thank you, and we'll be back next week with another episode.
Hopefully someone other than Thomas watches it.
Other people watch it.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Bye.